Hi, and welcome to the first Church of Deep House podcast. My name is Farah DJ, a Deep House DJ based in London, and also the creator and founder of the Church of Deep House podcast, a brand new space dedicated to that pure Deep House sound. I'll be your host for this episode, as well as future episodes, and today I'm joined by Nils, a London-based house music DJ who, along with myself, is also the resident DJ for the Church of Deep House.
Hello.
So this episode will be a combination of dialogue and music, where first I'll be talking to you about how the Church of Deep House podcast idea came about, as well as what it is that you can come to expect from future podcasts. Nils and I will then discuss what it is that attracts us to Deep House, as well as what inspired the selection for our individual 30-minute mixes, which will come a bit later in the podcast and which we hope you'll enjoy. Is there anything you'd like to include here, Nils?
I think you have it all covered, Farah.
Awesome. So, the Church of Deep House came about as a result of me feeling as though I couldn't necessarily play the type of Deep House I loved during my Into the Deep radio show whilst it was on Lay Low London. So Lay Low London is a West London-based pirate radio station with its foundations in grime and garage. And as a result of that foundation, I was really mindful that the audience wouldn't necessarily appreciate the Deep House I wanted to play, nor find it accessible. So whilst I played across the Deep House spectrum on my radio show, the Deep House I love to play and that I'd say really touches my heart is typically mellow and slow, say around 123 beats per minute or less, and also towards that melancholic sensual sound, which in my mind is not for everyone. And so as a result of that, I decided that I'd create a space in the form of a regular podcast, which I'd stream via Mixcloud on a Sunday, and which would be a place where essentially I could indulge in that pure Deep House sound that I love. I called it the Church of Deep House because it would take place on a Sunday, and because it actually felt like I'd be delivering a musical service for the soul for whomever wanted to attend. So after one stream, the church idea evolved. So effectively, I decided I wanted the podcast musical focus to not just be about playing that Deep House sound, but also about talking about it. So whether it be reviewing a track and its experiential impact, interviewing or talking to producers and DJs and listeners, having DJs create Deep House mixes for the church or doing live streams. For me, it really was and is about connecting with like-minded people who are passionate about that Deep House sound, as well as delivering a quality of musical experience that I guess I yearn for through the mediums of dialogue and sound. So essentially what I'm saying is that what you'll get from the podcast is dialogue and or music focused on that pure Deep House sound that I love so much. And actually it's really interesting that now my radio show is on Project London, which is a place where I feel I can play the sound that I love, because Project London is very much dedicated to playing kind of underground electronic music. The podcast's ability to forge the connections I've just spoken about through not just listening to music but talking to music remains a need for me, particularly because it seems to me that true Deep House is so niche. So there seems to be very much a focus on deep tech or minimal or Afro house or Afro tech. But, you know, where is that space for Deep House? Moreover, you know, for me, it's not only, it's not just about listening. As I said, it's good to talk. And so for me, the talking element that I envision for the podcast very much connects with my interest in depth psychology and phenomenology, where essentially we'll focus on the deeper meaning and experience of music on our being. So if this is something that intrigues you, I hope you'll join our podcast as well as get involved, which you can do by following the Church of Deep House on Instagram, Facebook, as well as subscribing to our channel on YouTube. But I've spoken a lot about Deep House, and I think what's next is for us to answer the question around what it is that Nils and I love about Deep House. So I'm going to hand over to Nils to talk to you about his love for Deep House and where that stems from.
What I love most about Deep House, amongst many things, but what I love most is its ability to allow the user, the end user, the listener to express themselves. You know, I think most popular types of music don't afford that space for the listener to receive it in their own way. I think like through popular music, it tries to impress itself through chords and suggestive sonics and tries to get a feeling out of you. Whereas I feel like Deep House gives the listener space to receive the music like in a way that suits them at a time through more discrete sonics, more subtle arrangements, and just, it allows you to receive it in a way that you need to at a time, because everyone's going through something different in their life, right? And you could have a room full of 100 people, and I feel like Deep House allows everyone to receive the feeling of the music in a way that they need to at that moment, through giving people space, because we need space, right?
Definitely need space. I like the way you put that. Yeah, it gives you what you need in the moment, so it allows you to be effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to what you've said, because I think for me, one of the things that I love about Deep House is very much the way it makes me feel, or allows me to feel. So on one hand, there's a certain sound quality that reminds me of my initial experiences of house music, when I used to listen to it on pirate radio stations during the 80s and 90s. And like to this day, I can still recall kind of the experience that I had, which was very much this feeling of a sense of joy and expansion despite the melancholic vibe of the music, and the fact that it expressed certain feelings in ways words couldn't necessarily. And then I guess fast forward to now, for me, it really is about Deep House's ability to enable me to transcend my everyday sense of self, which we typically call the ego, into and toward deeper parts of myself. So I think that that's probably what I experienced when, I first encountered house, but now with kind of more awareness and more consciousness, I'm able to kind of articulate what that experience was. And it's also about, those oh my God moments that I have in response to the music. So, when you're on the dance floor and the music just hits you and your response, your natural kind of response is, oh my God, I think it's at those moments where words typically fail themselves, and it's just where it really is all about the music, the feeling and the music in that moment. And so for me, whenever I play, and one of the objectives of this podcast, it really is about creating, those moments for you, the listener. So what I would also like to say about Deep House is that for me, it is what I would call the intelligent subgenre of house music. And this is something that I've always felt even before I began DJing. So the reason why I say that is because the soundscape for me conveys a level of sophistication that takes you, or should I say me, on a journey that can be experienced in terms of opposites. So it can be both dark and light. It can be sexual and spiritual. It can be oceanic. So when I play it, sometimes it feels as though I'm diving, deep underwater to the bottom of the ocean. And yet at the same time, it can be atmospheric and cosmic, but then also earthy. Then there's the fact that it's melancholic. So, the term melancholy is something that I've mentioned earlier in terms of what I like about Deep House, but I know it's something that other people have ascribed to, their experience of Deep House. But then with the melancholy comes also a feeling of joy. There's also the fact that it's gritty and penetrative, whilst at the same time being meditative and yet expansive. And so from a psychological perspective, as I mentioned the term opposite, it enables, us to experience opposites in the ways that some of us may not typically allow. So for example, in some spiritual schools of thought, there is this focus on the light and a denial and suppression of what is deemed as dark because of the various judgments associated with what darkness means. But, this is all part of us, when you get to know, what you're about and what you are, it's part of us. So where do you think that goes, and what do you think happens to that energy? So ultimately, it creates a shadow on both an individual and collective level, which we then project onto others. And this is how, scapegoating occurs and the demonization of, whole groups of others through this kind of projection process. And so healing the shadow is in part about understanding and healing the judgments that we hold about these opposing aspects of our being. And through that healing process, what happens is that we kind of integrate, these energies, I guess, into our personality so that we can become whole. And with that becomes, it results in the ending of projection and scapegoating and demonization of, as I said, groups of others. So for me, through the medium of sound, which is Deep House, we are temporarily allowed to experience those opposites without judgment. And I guess if this is done consciously, can or could lead to healing. But, even without, the analysis, just simply, I love listening to it. I love dancing to it. I love playing it. And so it's all of this that has inspired my selection for my 30-minute mix. The tunes I've selected all have a sense of melancholy and yet are joyful. They also make me feel a sense of expansion and yet connection to certain parts of my body. And, some of them remind me of my first experience of house music, which actually I think is quite fitting for my first mix for this project. And just a final thing I want to say about this project, which is the Church of Deep House podcast, it's something that I'm feeling really, really energized and excited about. So with that said, I'll hand over to Nikal so that he can tell you about his inspiration or what inspired him and his selection for his 30-minute mix.
One of the main inspirations was just to get it right, get it right for the church. And then the second one was I selected a couple of tracks. The first track was like the feeler, and I just got a sense of weightlessness from it. Like I tried to garner a feeling from, when you put together a mix, try and make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Mm-hmm. So I got a feeling of weightlessness, and I decided to run with that. So I tried to play around with feelings of weightlessness through like free falling and, like a feeling of weightlessness through shooting up and also just floating along. So I tried to play around with that and see if I could get something that just felt like a weightless journey as such.
Well, hopefully, I guess that's for the listener to let us know once they've heard the mix. So we hope that you'll enjoy the journey that our mixes take you on. We also hope that you've enjoyed the short dialogue between Nikal and I. We will definitely be going into more detail about who we are and what we're about in future episodes. But in the meantime, as I said, we hope you'll enjoy the mix and that you'll let us know what you think and feel on either Instagram, Facebook, and or YouTube. And if you haven't already, and only if you're feeling it, connect with us on either one of the channels to see what we're doing and to potentially contribute to the podcast. And with that said, enjoy the mixes. Take care.
See you later.
Ciao. Farah DJ in the mix. You've been listening to the sounds of Far DJ.